Well, I was joined just a short time ago from our Perth studio by the opposition spokesman on defence, Senator David Johnston. David Johnston, thanks for being there.
Pleasure, Tony.
Now, do you support the idea of using the Cocos Islands as an airbase for US surveillance aircraft?
Oh, absolutely. I think our closest ally, if they're prepared to assist us in the management of what is a huge maritime frontier, I would welcome that, and I know the coalition would welcome that.
There does seem to be a plan to either replace or supplement Diego Garcia, to build another version of it, possibly. We should note that the US Navy operates that base in Diego Garcia for warships. It also has a military airbase there under lease from Britain. So would a coalition government be prepared to enter a similar arrangement with the United States in the Cocos Islands?
Oh, that's very speculative. We need to see the details. We wouldn't be, doing anything without thoroughly exploring what that actually means. But look, they've got a 20-year option on Diego Garcia. Why would they want to leave? I'm very keen and pleased that they want to participate in the surveillance of what is a very difficult proposition, managing our economic zone and our maritime frontier. I think that's a great thing.
Except that the Americans, it seems to me, want to surveil further north. I mean, they want to use the spy planes to look at what China's doing in the South China Sea. Would the coalition be comfortable with that?
Well, the Global Hawk, which I think is the platform everybody's talking about, is completely unarmed. It is a very good intelligence gathering platform and would do a lot of good things domestically for Australia in terms of bushfire management, cyclone damage surveillance. But look, the Americans have Guam. They can do all sorts of things from Guam and from Japan. Now, the point is, I think what we can do with the Americans is jointly beneficial. This is a huge maritime environment right across to Sri Lanka. Now, we've seen a lot of boats, we've seen a lot of tragedy, we've seen a lot of problems in this area because it's so big for our 23 million people to manage. If the Americans want to come to the party and assist us, I welcome that.
But I'll go back to what I was saying before. I mean, they'll be wanting Cocos Islands to look at what the Chinese are doing, essentially. And that's part of their Defence Force posture that's changing to refocus. They wouldn't necessarily be doing what you want the drones to do.
Well, I'm not sure that they will be doing what you're suggesting they're going to do. They've got a whole lot of other capability that is very capable in looking at what's happening in our region. Now, let's not get the cart before the horse here. We, with our closest ally, have a responsibility to look after particularly this massive investment in the northwest of Western Australia. There's about $400 billion worth of investment in oil and gas and minerals in Western Australia. Canberra has a responsibility to do something about it. If the Americans want to assist us in that, in guaranteeing maritime security to our trading partners in East Asia, as I say, I welcome that.
If the Americans wanted to actually lease the Cocos Islands and run it as their own base, would the coalition agree to that?
Well, I think broadly we would be very positive towards such a proposal. But look, let's look at the details. I mean, I don't think Australia should do anything in terms of its sovereignty in the nature of a blank cheque. I am very keen that we welcome the Americans in any shape or form that they want to come and work with us in our region. But, let's be a little bit circumspect. Let's see what the terms and conditions are and let's do it together.
So even if they wanted to have their own base on Australian territory, as the British have allowed them to do?
Well, they've got more than a dozen joint facilities in Australia now, Tony. One more, I think, is neither here nor there to some greater or lesser extent.
Well, the question is whether it be a joint facility, and I suppose this is the point that Stephen Smith kept repeating today. We don't have US bases in Australia. We're not proposing to have US bases in Australia or on Australian territory. Does the coalition feel differently about that? Do you have less qualms about having US bases on Australian territory?
Well, probably we do, but I think we're all pretty bipartisan on dealing with our major and most important ally.
So you made the point in your press release today that Stephen Smith has a do-nothing approach. That's what you said. One example of it was that he said the Cocos Island upgrade was somewhere off in the future. Presumably, in that case, you'd want to accelerate this process, would you?
Well, we probably would, because for the last two elections we've taken as our lead policy initiative into the election, we've taken a broad area maritime surveillance capability. Now, that is effectively probably the Global Hawk platform. We've committed $100 million to that project in the United States, and then in 2009 we just pulled out, thus wasting $100 million. Now, I want to see us get back into that program, because with all of these boats arriving, with all of the things that are happening in terms of our export industries, our maritime supply routes, we need to surveil them properly. Now, the Broad Area Maritime Surveillance Project does that. Stephen Smith has put that out to 2022. In other words, never. Now, I'm very concerned about that. When will Canberra shoulder the responsibility of looking after the economic future of Australia? And that is maritime security.
Well, I mean, I think you committed to buying at least 3 of these surveillance drones, these maritime surveillance drones, if you came to government. First of all, would you do that at the expense of other projects, or would you add that on top of the current defence budget?
Well, look, each one is worth about $100 million. This is a $27 billion portfolio. I just see it's a reordering of priorities, and heaven knows we need to do that, given the problems we've had. You know, we're running at $3, $4, $5 billion worth of expenditure for housing and accommodation of people, and running our patrol boats to and from Christmas Island from Darwin. It's a massive problem. We need some assistance. We need to get real-time surveillance into this vast area. And look, it's in the scheme of things, it's not that expensive, and we are not spending any more new money on this project. We're simply reordering priorities, which I believe we can do effectively and cost effectively.
So you'd cut some other projects in order to include this $300 million project that you're talking about, would you?
Well, I think we'd say, Tony, we'd reorder our priorities given what has gone before.
That amounts to the same thing, doesn't it? You have to cut something in order to get $300 million.
Well, we might. Yeah, some things are more urgent than others.
Now, would the Coalition support a massive upgrading of the Stirling, HMAS Stirling naval base in WA, as is being suggested, to service US aircraft carriers, warships and nuclear submarines?
Well, look, let's get something very clear. The channel into Garden Island, Cockburn Sound, will not accommodate an aircraft carrier. So any aircraft carrier coming to Fremantle will stay out in Gauge Roads. But submarines come and go from HMAS Stirling quite regularly, and I see no problems in dealing with frigates and submarines. Indeed, the Western Australian Government has operated the Australian Marine Complex. They've built that infrastructure precisely for that reason. Oil and gas are using it very well. There's a floating dock down there. We have facilities that will accommodate US Navy interim maintenance procedures. Now, I think that's a very positive thing. Let's remember, most of the things we do in the world, we're interoperable with the United States. I think it's logical, and I welcome it.
What I guess is being talked about here, particularly in the Washington Post article, is that Stirling becomes the major US port on the Indian Ocean.
Well, that remains to be seen. These things take a very long time. We'd want to see all of the detail in that. But look, we've had US task forces through Fremantle for the last 25 years. And I know the Fremantle Chamber of Commerce absolutely loves them, as do most Western Australians.
Okay.
And I don't see a problem.
Including with nuclear submarines?
Including with nuclear submarines, often 2 nuclear submarines.
The former Army Chief, Peter Lay, told us today that Australia is on the verge of over-committing to the Joint Strike Fighter aircraft. He says we should buy fewer of them and take that leap, as he says, into buying new combat drone aircraft, the new technology of the future. What do you say to that?
Well, I think I admire Peter Lay, and I listen to what he has to say. He was a very good Chief of Army. I just think we need to be a little bit cautious about banking on technology that isn't quite with us. Now, the Joint Strike Fighter will come into service over the next 10 to 15 years in Australia. We'll have plenty of time to reassess how many we're going to get and to look at what other competing, more effective capability is on offer. But at this stage, the Joint Strike Fighter is a fabulous aircraft. I'm a huge supporter of it, as are 9 certain buyers in terms of countries. with potentially Japan, South Korea and Singapore adding to that group.
Okay,
that's 12 countries.
I'll just interrupt you there for a minute. Peter Lay says that 100 Joint Strike Fighter aircraft is simply too many, that is Menzies era thinking. Is he right about that?
Well, look, I don't want to contest that with him. He's a senior soldier who I respect greatly. I'm very interested in his comments, but at this stage, my advice is that the white paper has set out 100 for very good reason. And I'm prepared to rely on what the white paper has said.
Should we be looking at combat drone aircraft, possibly even building them ourselves?
Well, Tony, I think we should be looking at capability that's cost effective and that's cutting edge and that's regionally dominant at every possible opportunity. Now, I'm not going to close off any options, particularly when the technology is emerging as it is.
How many submarines would a coalition government build in Australia?
Well, we have endorsed what the white paper says. The white paper has got bipartisan support. We have said 12. Whether they're built in Australia, because the word used in the white paper is assembled in South Australia. Now, that's a very significant word. Currently, remember, the white paper has not been costed. We've seen none of the 30 pages of costings that were originally in the white paper. Now, ASPI, Australian Strategic Policy Institute, has costed these 12 submarines at $36 billion. I've got to tell you that is unrealistic.
So what do you think the correct costing is?
Well, I'd want to know. I mean, this government tells us nothing. Can I tell you? Anything I know about defence, I've had to go and find out for myself, because this government keeps us all, including the Australian public, completely in the dark. OK,
but if you decided it was too expensive, would you be prepared to buy submarines off the shelf, as it were, buy ready-made submarines and let that manufacturing capability in South Australia die?
Well, I wouldn't let the capability die. Remember that 1/3 of the total cost of any platform in its life is acquisition. So 2/3 of the cost will be in sustainment. Now, South Australia is absolutely ideally suited with the infrastructure and the technology and the capability it has to service and sustain those submarines. So it's no question of whether we let the capability die. It's a question of what is the most cost-effective way of getting the best capability for the taxpayer.
OK, but it sounds like from what you're saying, you are prepared to not see them assembled in South Australia if you think it's cheaper to buy them whole, as it were.
If the coalition was to think that it's more cost-effective and a better capability to acquire a ready-made solution, we would certainly be interested in that. But as I say, I'm completely ignorant as to what Admiral Rowan Moffat has on his table and what he's advised the government. Now, there is an element of bipartisanship here, but I don't want to see the taxpayer paying $36 billion for 12 unique Australian submarines that are going to cause us the same level of problems that we've had with the Collins.
David Johnston, we'll have to leave you there. We've run out of time. We thank you very much for taking the time to come and talk to us tonight on Late Light.
Always a pleasure, Tony.